In this tutorial, we'll cover how to deploy Azure Functions using GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions enables you to deploy your code continuously using continuous integration. So that fully automates the deployment of your code. In this tutorial, we'll create an Azure Function App within Azure, and then we'll create a GitHub Actions workflow YAML file. And then we'll deploy changes to our code using the tool Act. And Act allows you to run GitHub Actions workflows locally on your local machine using Docker. And then from there, when we're happy with that, we can just add the code into GitHub and then check it works using GitHub Actions. Let's get started now. What we need to do is create a couple of Azure resources. We'll start by creating the resource group, storage account, and the function app. So let's do that now. We'll create the resource group first with an AZ group create command. From there, we'll create the storage account. Next, we'll create the function app. This is using the AZ Function App create command, passing the resource group. We'll be using a consumption plan located in EastUS. It will be named Cloud Engineer Skills Func App. It will use the storage account we created before. Its runtime will be on Node, and we'll use an OS type of Linux, and we're using the version 4 of Functions. Okay, so that's now created. What we're going to do now is initialize the function app locally using func-init. And this is going to be a Node Azure Functions project, and we're going to be using JavaScript. So it's just running an npm install to get all the dependencies, so just wait for that to complete. So we've initialized the Azure Function App project. We haven't added any functions to it yet, so let's add a function to it. This is all locally, we haven't put it into Azure yet, so let's add one function with a func new command. And we're going to use a HTTP trigger, so that's number 8. We just keep the name as HTTP trigger. And if we clear the screen and list what we've got here, if we go into source and then into functions, we should see one function here, the HTTP trigger function. If we have a look at the contents of that file, we should see a very simple function. This is the code for the HTTP trigger. In Azure, you can make GET or POST requests to it. And what it does is it returns the body hello with a comma. And if you provide a name as a parameter, it will give you your name back. And if you don't, it just says hello, world. Now, what we want to do now is deploy this using GitHub Actions. Now, first we'll start by using this tool called Act, which runs within a Docker container. You need Docker Engine on your machine to do this. Lets you test out a GitHub Action workflow without using GitHub itself. That way you can avoid making lots of failed requests on your GitHub Actions screen and see a lot of errors there. Instead of doing that, just test it locally first, test that works. And if it works for you, then you can move over to using your GitHub repo and GitHub Actions on your GitHub repo. So we need a publish profile, and we can get that in the Azure portal on the Function app. So let's grab that now. So this is the resource groups I have. I'm going to go into the resource group we created, go into the Function app. And from there, I'm going to select Get Publish Profile. And that's going to download a publish profile for me. I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to put this into a secrets file, which I'll use for Act in the future. So for the secrets file, it needs to be in a directory called .github.workflows. So I'll create a new file under .github/workflows, and I'm going to call this main.secrets. And I'm just going to paste in this publishing profile that I've just pulled out of the Azure portal. And for the secret name, it's going to be called Azure Function App Publish Profile. Okay, so that is the secrets file. We'll use this for both GitHub Actions in GitHub and also using Act locally. So another thing we want to do is we just want to make a git ignore file so we can avoid ever checking in that secrets. Okay, because you don't want that in your code repository for security reasons. It should never go in there. So next we'll need to add a YAML file. and this will be the GitHub Actions workflow file. So we need to put this into that same directory. So under .github/workflows, we need to put this file in there as well. I'm going to call it main.yaml. So this is the contents of the file. So you want to give your workflow a name. This, I've called it deploy Azure Functions Node.js project to Azure Function App. And we're going to get this to run on push. And got to set a few environment variables here. So we've got the function app name, and that is just what I called the function app when I created it in the command line interface. So I'm just going to copy over that. That's going to be Cloud Engineer Skills Func App. If you've called it something else, make sure you replace that environment variable here. Next is the Azure Function App package path. It's the path relative to the project directory GA here, where the functions are located. So I'm using the root project path here, which is GA. So I'm not going to go into any other folders from there. I'm just going to use that folder. Specify the node version. I'm using node version 20. And next we've got the jobs. Now we've got just one job. It's called build and deploy. And we're running it on Ubuntu latest. And these are the steps that are involved in this process. The first step is to use the actions checkout GitHub action to check out the code from GitHub. Next, it will run an install of Azure CLI. Now, this is only needed for when you're doing a self-hosted runner, and Act is a self-hosted runner. So Act won't have the CLI pre-installed for Azure, so you have to do that manually. So that's why I've included that step. If you're not going to use Act, you can avoid this completely. You can take this out. Next, I'm going to use a setup node action to set the node version to what has been specified in the environment variable here, which is 20.x. After that, we will install the dependencies using npm. And this is using a shell and a run command. And the run command will then go to the right directory within your GA folder and run npm install, run npm run build, and npm run test if you can. And then finally, we've got the run Azure Functions action. And it's using the Azure Functions action. And what it's got here is a couple of parameters, your app name, which I've specified in the environments. You've got the package path, which is defined in the environment variable as well. And the publish profile, which we've already copied over to our secrets. And we've gotten that out of the Azure portal. And it'll use that to then deploy the functions to our Azure Function App. So let's make use of this now. So we'll start by using Act. So I'll run Docker. You need to have Docker running for this. And this is Act. If you want to learn more about Act, you can go to nectosact.com and you can get that installed. There's also a link to the GitHub in the blog post as well. Let's test out this GitHub Actions workflow now. So we'll use Act for this, like I said. And Docker Engine is now running. So what we'll do is we'll go back to the root directory for the project, and then we'll run the Act command. So we'll run Act, and then we'll specify a secrets file, which will be the secrets file we've defined in the directory .github/workflows. Okay, so it looks like that is successful. So what I'll do now is check in Azure. I'll go into the function app again, I'll refresh it. And what we should see here is the function which has been pushed into our Azure Function App. So we can see we've got the HTTP trigger here. And yes, that's the code that we wanted. So if we can go into the function now by getting the function URL, if we grab that and put it into the browser, it should work as expected. Hello world. And then if we specify a name, yep, that works as well. So that's automating changes using a GitHub Actions workflow using the Act tool. So let's do this now within GitHub and GitHub Actions. So to do that, we need to get a repository created in GitHub. Let's get this into GitHub. So I'll go git init here. So I'm going to add these files to my GitHub repo. You'll notice that the secrets file is not there. Now I want to publish this into GitHub into a private repository. Okay, I'm going to open this in GitHub. Okay, so as you can see, it's failed here. So it's failed here because it doesn't have the publishing profile set up as a secret. So we need to set that up now. So if we go back into the project, and from there we go into the settings section, under secrets and variables, select actions, and we're going to add a new repository secret. The repository secret will have the name Azure Function App, published profile. If you've run it locally using Act before, you can just get the main.secrets file, which you didn't put into your repository, and just grab the published profile from there. And select Add Secret. So now what I want to do is make a change to the Azure function, and then I'll push that into GitHub, and it will automatically trigger the GitHub action workflow that we've just defined and publish a new version of the Azure function. Okay, so I'm just going to add some more text to the body. I can do CICD with GitHub Actions. Okay, so that's the change I'm going to make, and I'm going to commit that locally, then push it into the GitHub repo. Change the response body. Going to push those changes into the GitHub repo. And if we go into the GitHub repository and refresh it under Actions, you can see one new workflow has started. And it's on the build and deploy step. And we'll wait for that to finish. So it says that's finished now. So what we should do is have a look in the Azure portal. We should refresh the HTTP trigger code, and we should see some changes in the code here. You can see that text, I can do CICD with GitHub Actions. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this function again. Yep, hello world, I can do CICD with GitHub Actions. That's working. So that's it for this tutorial. Before you finish up, make sure to delete all those resources. You can do that in the Azure portal. Make sure to delete this resource group as well, which is created with the Log Analytics workspace. Make sure to delete that too. If you found this useful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.